Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hello, Geeta, Bradley, Adriana, Scott. Good to see you all. And hello to Bhante Suddhaso. Thank you for agreeing to share the Dharma with us this afternoon. All right, so without further ado, pass it on to Bhante.
Okay. So we can start by doing a little bit of meditation practice. So please go ahead and get in a uncomfortable position.
Uncomfortable.
Yes, an uncomfortable position, because as Ajahn Amaro said, there's no such thing as a comfortable position. So go ahead and select an uncomfortable position which is supportive to your meditation practice.
That is comfortable at the beginning and then uncomfortable in the middle and in the end. Or uncomfortable in the middle and very uncomfortable at the end.
So sitting up nice and straight. Taking a few deep breaths to relax the body and mind. Letting each breath be a bit softer and gentler than the previous one. And slowly letting your breathing return to its natural rhythm. Start with a broad, open awareness of your whole sensory domain. Not focusing on anything in particular, not doing anything in particular. Just letting the mind rest, bright, aware, and stable. Clearly knowing, yet inactive. not projecting any ideas of separate objects, not projecting any concepts of things, just letting the sensory domain be what it is without filtration, without alteration, without judgment. Just clearly knowing directly each moment. Not expecting anything, not rejecting anything, just clearly knowing and letting go. not pushing, not pulling, just knowing and letting go. Not ignoring, yet not involved, just knowing and letting go. No past, no future. Just knowing and letting go. No inside, no outside. Just knowing and letting go. No body, no mind, just knowing and letting go. One more deep breath. Let it out slowly. You can release your posture. Moving from one uncomfortable position to another uncomfortable position.
Well, Adriana says lying posture seems pretty comfortable.
That's what you think until you do it for several hours. So I've never actually done this, but I've heard of some monks who had some kind of serious health condition and they couldn't do sitting, standing, and walking. So they would do many, many hours of reclining meditation every day. And what they reported is that actually, eventually, even that becomes uncomfortable. Basically, any posture, if you stay still in it for long enough, becomes uncomfortable if your equanimity is not strong. Anyway, at this time, if there's anything you'd like to bring up about your practice, we can go ahead and talk about whatever's on your mind.
Thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu. And Sally says, actually, Adriana says, oh, dukkha. Oh, we miss you, Adriana. Sally says, how to let go of the past achievement growth. I realized today the dukkha feeling comes from the attachment I had to the last anicca retreat, where I had good samadhi, inspiration, insight, wholesome mind. One of the best I experienced. But these days, not much time to meditate as before. So I'm discontented and suffering from not much growing, not feeling well as the previous retreat. Comparison is dukkha.
Yeah. So it sounds like you already have a pretty good grasp of the problem here. So, of course, during retreats, our meditation goes well because that's what retreats are designed for. Retreats are designed for good meditation, they're designed for strong samadhi, they're designed for deep insight. But they're also artificial conditions that are temporary. We can't just be in retreat nonstop. Even if you go on a very long retreat, many months or even many years, which some people do, Again, in the course of my monastic life, I've done many 3-month-long retreats, which are wonderful. I haven't done one in a few years, and I actually really miss it. It's a really, really wonderful thing. But what tends to happen with really long retreats is that it starts to feel more like ordinary life, because you can't actually get away with just being an intensive retreat all the time. There's always things that you need to do, and things that you have to take care of, and things that you have to think about, and people you have to talk to, and there's always something. So it's really not possible to have ideal retreat conditions for more than a few days, maybe a few weeks, if you line up your cards just right. Rarely a few months if you're really careful. But not a whole life. So then also just accepting that there will be times when we've got really good conditions and therefore our samadhi is great, and other times when the conditions are less good, which means our samadhi is going to be less strong, but it means that it's that much more important for us to develop other qualities of the path, other factors of awakening. There are 7 factors of awakening. Only one of them is samadhi. So when we're in conditions where samadhi is not so easy to develop, then we should work on the other 6. Equanimity. No matter what conditions you're facing, you can practice equanimity. That's a really big one. That's a major part of my own practice. And I'm not perfect at it, of course, as Ayya Soma can attest to. My equanimity does crack every now and then, more often than I would like. But it's something which you can practice in any situation, no matter what it is. Wisdom, seeing everything as impermanent, or knowing the dukkha. That's also a wisdom practice, knowing the dukkha in every moment. Mindfulness, of course, you can always practice mindfulness. So you can practice in this way. So of course you can't always get samadhi, at least not strong samadhi. You can have a certain amount of weak samadhi, even in the midst of activity, even while thinking and talking, you can have a certain amount of weak samadhi. But yeah, strong samadhi only really happens during intensive retreats. It can happen outside of retreat environments, but it's much rarer, much more difficult. So just accept that. You've seen the conditional nature of samadhi. That's how it is. So don't bother about the results you are or aren't getting. Just keep developing the causes, the conditions in your mind. So keep setting up the conditions that will build up your practice. And when the external conditions are right, then all those causes that you've been building up internally all along will mean that the external conditions will allow you to get very strong samadhi very quickly. So this is really noticeable during retreats. During retreats, some people, within the first day or two, their samadhi is very stable and their mind is very bright. And then other people, 5 or 6 days in, and they're still restless and agitated, and they can barely sit still, let alone hold their mind still. What's the difference? The difference is that the first person is someone who's been cultivating lots of wholesome, supportive mind states all throughout their activities. So when they come on retreat, their cards are already in place. Everything's in place. And the external conditions just allow them to drop into samadhi right away. And the second person is someone who has been cultivating messy mind, unwholesome mind, throughout their daily activities. And then when they come on retreat, they have to spend a lot of time just building up the causes and conditions for good samadhi. So you develop the internal conditions, and then when the external conditions are right, then you'll get into deep samadhi very quickly. Okay?
And Mark is saying, if I find myself going to samadhi during this meditation, should I stay there or bring my mind back to this meditation or whatever alternative meditation I'm using? And sorry, I missed his first part. So when doing the meditation, do I direct the mind at all or simply let perception and thoughts arise as they may? And then there was the part of samadhi.
So the meditation instructions I was giving just now is silent illumination practice, which in Pali is called animitta samadhi. So objectless samadhi, samadhi with no object, or apanahita samadhi, which is undirected samadhi. So yeah, in those cases, you're not focusing on any particular object. In fact, we're trying to let go of objects. Because as one develops this meditation, it becomes increasingly clear that the perception of separate objects is a projection of our mind. It's a projection of our expectations. It's not real. It's just an idea that we project on the world. So there's no objects to focus on, in fact. There's merely our concepts of objects. You stop producing the concepts, there's no objects. So there's no object to focus on. The directing of the mind, similarly, is directing the mind to be knowing and releasing. So knowing and letting go, this basic instruction. Knowing and letting go. That's the direction of the mind. And it's not north, south, east, or west. It's not pointing in any particular direction. Rather, it's just knowing and letting go. So when we notice the mind is losing the knowing, then we bring back up knowing. When we notice the mind is fixating on things, then we bring back up the releasing. That's the effort that's involved. It's the effort to keep knowing and releasing. That's the direction. It's directing the mind to keep knowing and releasing. So this is a relatively subtle method. It's not particularly easy. In fact, it's quite challenging. But when done properly, it's extremely profound, extremely deep. And admittedly, it has not much direct relation to the theme of this weekend. But it is very relevant in the sense that one is knowing dukkha and letting go of dukkha. Because as the Buddha said, all that arises is dukkha, and all that ceases is dukkha. It's only dukkha that arises, and only dukkha that ceases. So we're knowing dukkha, and we're releasing dukkha. That's what we're doing. So you start to tap into this vast, spacious peacefulness that comes through knowing dukkha and letting go of dukkha, moment after moment after moment. And we start to recognize that all manner of conceptualization, proliferation, ideation, it's all just dukkha. So we know it and we let go of it. That's the directing of the mind. If you find yourself going into samadhi practice, well, there's actually nothing wrong with samadhi practice. I'm a huge proponent of samadhi practice. I'm a huge fan of it. I talk about it all the time. I strongly encourage it. In fact, I like to recommend that people spend 95% of their time practicing samadhi. Soma is making her little disgruntled face when I say that.
No.
Oh no, maybe that's from something she's reading. Never mind. Yeah, samadhi's great. And especially if you notice your mind is a bit restless and scattered and it's drifting off the knowing and letting go, then you probably need more samadhi. So this method, the silent illumination method, it's really nourished by strong samadhi. I've done a number of retreats using this method. And some retreats I would use just this method, and other retreats I would start with, say, 3-4 days of samadhi practice. And I found that starting with 3-4 days of samadhi practice was far more effective, because then the mind was already stable enough to practice knowing and releasing. But trying to go directly into knowing and releasing, it took much longer for the mind to stabilize. So yeah, if your samadhi is not strong, then this method is almost certainly going to be a disastrous failure. In which case, if you feel that you need more samadhi, then do more samadhi. No problem. Yeah, go for it.
And Sally says, I had inspiration before that. I thought I'm able to overcome this habit, but don't have time continue to practice it to correct myself. Feel disappointed that out of my capacity to change this habit. Could Bhante in future give a talk or a sutta about developing equanimity, especially not in retreat? I really need this.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Can you make a note of that before I forget? Equanimity in daily life. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. We'll put that on the list. But yeah, one thing we also have to develop equanimity towards is how difficult the path is. We need to come to accept this basic fact. Buddhism is hard. It's not easy. Yeah, and Buddhist practice, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's going to be like that. And it's going to keep being like that up until you attain awakening. That's okay. We need to come to grips with this. That's how it is. Of course, we try to only make steps forward, but it rarely works that way. Very rarely. Yeah, so again, you just keep doing the best you can. And when you screw up, which is going to happen a lot, when you screw up, acknowledge it, forgive yourself, vow to do better. And if you keep doing that, then over time you'll get better. The problem isn't making mistakes. The problem is not correcting our mistakes. Making mistakes is perfectly normal. Backsliding is perfectly normal. That's not the problem. The problem is when we make mistakes and then we don't vow to correct them. The problem is when we backslide, but we don't acknowledge it as backsliding. That's when there's a problem. So just keep acknowledging, oh, I screwed up. Oopsie. Oh, well, I'm not enlightened. I'm going to try to, though. I'm going to try to get enlightened. I'm going to try to do better. Next time I'll catch myself before the mistake. Or I'll try to anyway. And in this way, over time, yeah, you get better.
And Yasmin says, during meditations, I have been finding it incredibly beneficial to concentrate on the gap between sense of inner body and the outer physical one, or skin suit. Something about this space helps me connect to what I perceive to be samadhi. There is a sense of dissolution without disassociation.
I don't know what you mean by the gap between inner body and outer body. I don't feel a gap in my own body, so I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. Maybe if you can clarify, that would be helpful.
Okay, so Yasmin, if you want to type in more information, then Bhante can address it. Sally says, again, what shall we do when the dukkha is persisting there? I mean, when the mind just let it go, it's not going away.
Well, then just know it. Know what it's like in this moment. Know it as it is. Without trying to push it away, without trying to change it, but also without trying to hold on to it. Just know it with the open hand. It's like holding a leaf on your hand on a windy day. Your hand is open and you see the leaf, but you also know that at any moment the wind might take it away. And you're not the slightest bit bothered because it's just a leaf. It doesn't matter if the wind takes it away, but it also doesn't matter if it stays on your hand. Either way, you just know it as it is, but without the slightest bit of obsession or fixation. But you're also not throwing the leaf away. You're just watching it, knowing it for what it is. And when the wind blows it away, no problem. So know the dukkha. Know it as it is. If it doesn't seem to be changing, if it doesn't seem to be going away, well, that isn't a problem. That's only a problem if you have aversion. That's only a problem if you're hating the dukkha and wanting it to disappear. Which is itself feeding the dukkha. Hating dukkha feeds dukkha. So don't hate it. Just acknowledge it, know it, without holding on to it, without wanting it to disappear, and without taking it personally. This is really important. Don't take your dukkha personally. It's not about you. It never was about you. It never will be about you. It's just dukkha, arising and ceasing. Just dukkha. Nothing we want to get involved in. And yet we can't ignore it either. Okay?
Right. Thank you, Bhante. And Andre is saying how even at Goenka that he's been to, they start with 3.5 days of concentration before starting insight and vipassana. I think it's related to what you were talking about earlier. And Marielle is sharing, just like in life, when you screw up, which we do constantly, it's all about correcting the mistake and keep learning and then continue doing it since other mistakes will come.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it says, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The problem is not the dukkha, the problem is the aversion to the dukkha. And Mark has a question off topic, but could you explain investigation as a factor of enlightenment briefly?
Let's talk about that this evening. I think that's a better format for it.
Okay. And Bradley has a sutta quote. We always love sutta quotes. They do it even though it's hard. Those who love peace of mind, whose minds love to meditate.
Is that from the Kamara Sutta?
Samyutta Nikaya 2.6.
Yeah, that's the Kamara Sutta. We're actually going to go over that in Sutta study one of these days.
Great.
Yeah, that's on the list. Yep. Great sutta.
And Mark is asking, did the Buddha really say everything is dukkha, even the Dharma?
No. What the Buddha said is, it's only dukkha that arises and only dukkha that ceases. That's what he said. He also said, Sabbe sankhara dukkha. So all sankharas are dukkha, which means all conditional phenomena are dukkha. And that's also something he said. Whether or not one calls the Dhamma a sankhara depends on how you define Dhamma. So if by Dhamma you mean the literal teachings of the Buddha, as in the words in the books, then yes, that's a sankhara, and therefore it's also dukkha. But if by Dhamma you mean the ultimate truth of the way things are, then that's not dukkha, because it's not a sankhara. Okay?
And Sally says, another question. Meditation, when physical pain arises, I can just observe and equanimity arises because I know it's out of my control. But when the mental pain arises, equanimity cannot arise because I have a sense that I should be able to change my thought. Why is it so hard? Changing a thought to a bright one can just happen in 1 second.
Well, because you're making the mistake of thinking that your mental objects are also fully in your control. Look more closely. Are they really? If they were fully in your control, then you wouldn't have unpleasant ones arising. The Buddha makes this blatantly obvious in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha actually directly says, he says, if feeling was self, then you would be able to control it. But you can't control it, therefore it's not self. If identification was yourself, you would be able to control it, but you can't. Therefore, it's not yourself. If mental formations were yourself, you would be able to control them, but you can't. Therefore, they're not yourself. If consciousness was yourself, you would be able to control it, but you can't. Therefore, it's not yourself. The Buddha is totally clear on this. You think you can control your mind? You can't. So this belief that your mind is under control, that's the problem. When you accept that it's not under your control, that emotions will appear for no apparent reason whatsoever, when thoughts will float to the surface of your mind, whether you want them to or not, when perceptions and feelings will appear and vanish in your mind, whether you want them to or not, once you accept that, then you can have equanimity towards it. But as long as you think you're in full control of mental objects, then you will suffer. You will have dukkha, and lots of it. So that's my recommendation at this time, is recognize that you do not have full control of mental objects. Therefore, practice equanimity towards them, just as you do towards body. The Buddha described mental objects as external, just the same way that sight, sound, smell, and taste are external. I found this mind-blowing when I first heard this. Because we tend to think, oh, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, that's obviously external stuff. But thoughts, that's internal. The Buddha's like, no, thoughts also are external objects which we become aware of. Just as we become aware of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, we become aware of mind objects. But they are external, not under our control. Therefore, practice equanimity towards them. Just see them as visitors that float through the mind. Just like your neighbor playing music, just floats through the mind, but you can't control it. But you can choose to not be bothered by it. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And I think that's all for this afternoon. So we can meet again at 7:30 p.m. and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, or if you're somewhere else in the world, the morning or evening, whatever time it is. And we'll see you again in a couple of hours. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a great